Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley here. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in for a new episode of the show. We're here in the offseason, so we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Last week's episode, we talked about kind of putting a bow on the season. So if you haven't a chance to go back and listen to that yet, please do on YouTube or on your podcast catcher of choice. Speaking of which, if you're not subscribed yet, please do here on YouTube, or if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on your podcast catcher of choice, please subscribe there as well. And please, if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review, because that really actually helps out the podcast a lot. You may not think it does, but the more reviews and stuff you get, the more written reviews especially, helps you kind of show up more on the Apple Podcasts, things like that as well. So kind of on the recommendations and stuff like that. So if you guys leave a 5-star review and leave an actual written review, we will read that here on air. Really want to appreciate the 3 who've done it already before, and the 11 people who've left us 5-star reviews in total on Apple Podcasts. And you can do the same on Spotify. I don't think you leave a written review now, but you can at least give a 5-star rating on Spotify. So we'd really appreciate all you all doing that. Appreciate all of you all and giving us the support you have so far. But Gene, let's dive into it here, because this episode is going to be dedicated to roster talk. And I think a lot of people have been looking forward to this one, and I've gotten several questions about roster stuff ever since the season ended, pretty much, or really even close to when the season wasn't even over with yet, in terms of just looking ahead at stuff. But Tennessee's had a lot happen in the last, 2-3 weeks roster wise at this point. Just this week alone, there's been 2 or 3 different stories and headlines for roster for Tennessee. Let's kind of go back a little bit to, I guess, kind of the beginning of the roster movement for Tennessee. And that was when Victor Bailey Jr. put his name into the transfer portal, transferred to George Mason. We talked about that last week. Wasn't a huge surprise that he transferred, and the destination wasn't a huge surprise either, because he's going to go play with Kim English, who was a former assistant at Tennessee, now the head coach at George Mason. I think it's a really good fit for him at George Mason. Since then, this week, actually both in the same day, you also had Kennedy Chandler declare for the NBA draft, and his message and Santiago Vescovi's message. I guess technically Vescovi was the first quote unquote domino to fall, if I remember the timelines right. I don't actually remember who did what first, but Vescovi put out a message that he said he's putting his name into the NBA draft consideration, going to go through the process, the evaluation process. And he said Rick Barnes actually really encouraged him to do that, but he will be maintaining his collegiate eligibility, which to me kind of signifies that unless he gets like really super positive reviews, which I think he'll get some positive reviews, but unless he gets like, hey, we think you can push your way into early second, late first round, which I don't think will happen. I think he's coming back next year. He may try to go overseas, but he also may go ahead and just try to graduate and then go overseas, when he's done at UT. So I think Vescovi will be an act next year. There's definitely a difference between the messages posted by Vescovi and Chandler. And of course, Chandler also went on ESPN to announce you don't go on ESPN as a true freshman to announce you're coming back for a second season. So he announced he's going to go to the NBA. Wish him best of luck. We'll talk about him in just a second. But on the same day, like just a couple hours after that, you also had the announcement from, I forget who it was I saw first report it, but that redshirt freshman, or I guess true freshman who redshirted this year, Andre Tamba, the 6'11" post player who played at Knoxville Catholic, and wasn't technically from Knoxville Catholic, but he played in East Tennessee, put his name in the transfer portal as well, even though he reclassified and then sat out this entire year for redshirt. I think that move kind of surprised me a little bit, Gene, because he's a guy who, he reclassified to get to Tennessee this year. Seemed like the team liked him. Seemed like, there's a bunch of videos and stuff of him doing the gritty and stuff after games and when victories for Tennessee. Seemed like he got along well with the teammates there. And I was kind of surprised he elected to transfer when, and maybe playing time next year wasn't going to be, big for him, because you have a lot of returning bigs for Tennessee. But the year after that, when he's his third year in the program, I feel like there was a good chance for him to make it, but maybe not. Maybe, I don't know the reasoning behind it. I don't want to speculate too much or anything like that either. But that's kind of been the moves. You have Chandler gone to the NBA, Bailey gone to George Mason, Vescovi putting his name in, but probably back, and then Tamba gone as well. So that's 3 guys departed so far. from the roster from this past season. The fourth one, kind of a limbo, but you feel pretty decent about him coming back. Kind of like you look at Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield. I guess Grant's a bad example. Admiral Schofield putting his name into the draft process and then coming back for his senior year. That it feels kind of similar to that. But there's also a good chance, I think, of a potential third player transferring. I don't know, who it could be or who it would be exactly, but there seemed to be a lot of talk around the program, from people who cover it extensively day in and day out, that there's a very strong chance there's a third player transferring. I don't want to throw out names, don't want to speculate on anybody, but I would not be shocked to see a third person transfer off the roster. But Gene, before we kind of get into all the departures, what Tennessee's losing, who they could be targeting, bringing in, I do want to talk about Kennedy Chandler and thoughts on his NBA potential, because I think the mock drafts I've seen from him are kind of all over the place. Some people have him as a mid first round pick. Some people don't have him going until, I think, early second round, like in the 30s in the second round. I mean, first 10 picks in second round, I guess. But I've seen him kind of all over the place. Most of the ones have him in the first round for the mock drafts I've seen, because I think just based on his talent and his skill level alone. But obviously his size is a big knock. I think there's been a lot of different things about his consistency. His free throw shooting especially was an issue this year too. But Gene, I think you can speak to it more than I can, because I watched the NBA, but it's definitely a lot more casually. Mostly just watch the Celtics because they're the team I root for and like. So I don't get to watch. I don't really watch too much else out there for the NBA. And I will say I will watch sometimes Memphis and Ja Morant, because that is worth watching, because Ja is an incredible player. But I'm curious your thoughts on kind of what you think the NBA potential is for Kennedy Chandler. Is he a guy that is we've talked a little bit about it here on the show before, but we haven't really talked about it extensively in months. So I think it's kind of good to revisit it. Is he a guy you think is a legit first round talent? Is he a guy that sticks around in the NBA for a while? Like, it's hard to, we don't know, but in your opinion, what is the NBA talent of Kennedy Chandler?
I think it's going to be a road. I think there's certainly going to be a long road ahead of him. Because I just don't have a good player comparison for him. Like, there's just not, like, he could be, the whole one of one type stuff, like, LaMelo Ball uses one of one. But again, just look around the league. I mean, it's not, I can't think of, like, even somebody as small as Ja Morant's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's the next level of athleticism too. Again, the comparison I think that's been made to Kennedy Chandler and Sharif Cooper from Auburn, and people have suggested that could be the type of road that Chandler would have to take. He could easily be late first round, early second round pick. I don't know what that means anymore, because the G League is it is so much more prevalent. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the two kids that were drafted last year. Neither one of them spent much time in the NBA, and one of those kids was a lottery pick, or right outside. I can't remember exactly, but yeah. I mean, like, I do think that there's a road ahead of them, a long road ahead, because people can look around and just not be able to understand how this player that they saw be great a game, or a month or a season, doesn't have, it's not all of a sudden, not all over, not plastered all over like every single draft board. It's like a top 5, top 10 pick. I mean, the last time that you really went that high on a draft pick that I can recall, I mean, I guess that draft that that Curry was in, where there was a point guard that went to Minnesota. It wasn't Ricky Rubio. They took another point guard that year, who I think played at Villanova or something like that. But he wasn't big, and needless to say, he did not pan out. And there was, because I think there was a joke that, okay, Minnesota had back-to-back picks, and neither one of those picks was Steph Curry.
Yeah, it was Johnny Flynn.
Yeah, Johnny Flynn. Syracuse. Yeah. So,
yep.
Yeah, and I don't remember his size. Like I feel like he may have been like 6'1" ish in that range.
Yep,
So
he's currently listed right now as 6'1", 194. I don't know what he was
right,
kind of high school or coming out of college, but that's what he is right now at age 33.
right. So and he hadn't played in the NBA in quite some time. And I understand that there is a road, and I understand that G League is all this, that, and the other. Like sometimes it's just not fair. Um, because I do think that there are people who will solely get opportunities, to play at that level just because they're big. Because basketball is a big man's game. It's a tall man's game more than a big man's game. And it's probably not fair what's about to transpire with Kennedy Chandler. Because you've watched that kid be elite, and the kid can't help the fact, thank God that his family did not like tie him to a bedpost and try to stretch him out to make him 6'4". Because like I'm just looking, and it's just I just don't know exactly how it works out for him. And look, I will gladly be wrong. I will gladly be wrong there, but I just don't know how it works itself out for this kid to be anything more than a G League player who may get a call up at some point. I mean, obviously, you see how fluid these situations are. Congrats to, obviously Eve Pons, who, as my former boss used to always say all the time, is getting a cup of coffee in, in the league right now and in a good place. But he's also 6'6" with like extreme athleticism. There's a difference there. And like, I will gladly be wrong there, but I don't see a scenario where, yeah, he could be. I think Sharif Cooper went 41 in the draft he was in. I don't remember, somewhere in that range.
He was in the 40s. Yeah, I just looked it up a second ago.
Yeah, so that's basically what you're talking about. And Sharif probably in totality, may have had a slightly better season. Now, one advantage that Kennedy Chandler has is there's nothing surrounding him. Whereas I felt like there were some circumstances I don't remember. I felt like there were some circumstances around Sharif, maybe at Auburn, like it was a late start.
Yeah, he had eligibility issues. I can't remember what exactly it was now either. We talked about it on this podcast actually when it happened.
And I don't remember if those were things that necessarily I don't think they were bad enough to really affect draft stock type stuff. But I feel like, Kennedy is going in there with a much cleaner slate per se.
Yeah, he missed the first 12 games of his freshman season due to investigation into his eligibility. Cooper did.
Right, but that the NBA doesn't care about that.
Yeah,
what was it for? Oh, okay, some sort of recruiting stuff. Okay, we don't care about that. It's just true, just the fact of the matter. I mean, you're going to, if a kid is good enough, we're going to look over some of the stuff. Because last time I checked DeAndre Ayton, nobody had any issues with all the stuff that surrounded him at Arizona. And that kid's fighting for a contract right now in the NBA. So we'll see. I don't see a scenario where that kid's on an opening day roster, but I do see a scenario where that kid is drafted late first round, early second round. And if he can get into the right situation, you never know. How big Davion Mitchell's like 6'2", right? Like even just the difference there between Davion Mitchell being 6'2" and Kennedy Chandler being 6 foot. Like it's weird that those lines are, that those metrics are that little.
He's listed as 6 foot, 6'2". So he's like, beefier than Kennedy, but yeah, 6 foot.
Yeah. And so look, if that's like, the game is changing. I'll say this, like that the game is changing in real time. Like Steph Curry changed all the metrics there. Mm-hmm. So like there's probably a scenario, but then you're looking around and it's like, how? Because it's it's not like, because Mitchell was like a bulldog. You just said he's 202 pounds. Chandler, has he seen 185? What do they list him as? Yeah, so like it's little stuff, but I do think that those little things kind of matter. And heaven forbid. I mean, I understand you want to get the opportunity, but the good thing about Johnson and Springer is that they both ended up on playoff caliber teams. So they kind of got stashed away to where they can kind of develop off the radar. Whereas, like, you get somebody like Kennedy, like Chandler, who goes to a place like, say, Sacramento, or I'm trying to think of one of these other, just Orlando or wherever, where basically careers go to die. It's unfortunate since there's a former Vol that plays for Orlando right now in Admiral Schofield, but that, Orlando is like last chance you. And it's unfortunate because, they're an NBA team. Shout out to Steve McGargan, former AP writer, huge Orlando Magic fan.
I feel bad
Keeps
for him.
up there. Yeah, it's tough. And I respect that because he strongly supports a loser. And it's not one of those, he does it with his chest. But yeah, I mean, you certainly hope. The bigger thing I think for Chandler would be if he is, you'd almost rather him be a late first round pick or a late second round pick, because the people who pick early, even with the draft lottery, are typically stinky teams. And you get into the Knicks or one of those sorts of teams that's out there fighting in the lottery or whatever, the Lakers. It's weird to say that this year, but yeah, I mean, like, you want to make sure, the most important thing is to make sure that he gets himself into a good situation, which he has zero control over because it's a draft. But I would lean more early second round as opposed to late first round. I think for him, late first round would potentially be better. But I could easily see him sliding into the 30s somewhere. That's usually what happens.
Yeah, I'm looking at one now from Sam Vecini, who we've mentioned before. You've mentioned, being a big fan of his from The Athletic. Had a mock draft, I think, over this past weekend, which is before Chandler had officially declared for the draft, but it was pretty well known he was going to do that. He listed Chandler as a, quote, substantial riser in his kind of mock draft, thanks to his play at the end of the season. He projected Kennedy to be taken with the number 18 overall pick by the San Antonio Spurs via the Toronto Raptors. So that would be interesting to see him, because I think there's also a current Vol with the Spurs right now, isn't there? There's oh man, I'm trying to remember who was with the Spurs. He's not playing a whole lot, but there's a former Vol player who's with the Spurs right now. I cannot remember who it is. But you mentioned before you kind of get back to Kenny Chandler, Keon Johnson was drafted by a team that I think could be, would be a good place for him to learn to develop. Then he got shipped off to Portland, where now they're playing all the young players. So he's getting an opportunity to play, and he's been shining. I tweeted out from the Vol Hoops Fever Twitter account that he's averaging, like, in his last 6 games, like almost 16 points per game. He's making 40-something% of his threes in like 30 minutes per game. So he's getting a chance to play, not on a good team, but I'll be interested to see if Portland holds on to him or if they end up trading him again. But it's been nice to see Keon get some minutes here in the last couple weeks for the Trailblazers, even though Blazers are 100% tanking right now. But yeah, I think again, here's more of a evaluation from Vecini on Chandler. Says he's another substantial riser up the board. By the end of the season, he was one of the best point guards in college basketball, dictating the pace of play, using his speed not just to blow by the opposition, but also to change gears more effectively. He also used pressure. He also pressured hard at the point of attack, along with fellow guard Zakai Ziegler, forcing teams into difficult situations. He won the MVP, all blah, blah, blah. But other things on here, kind of some knocks on his game, which I think are fair. I don't totally trust the jumper, but there's enough of a chance that he can fix it given his improvement over the last portion of the season. And his defensive aggression gives him a shot despite being small. So I think I think Sam Vecini does a really good job with kind of draft evaluation stuff. And I think that's pretty fair. Gene, that's stuff that we've kind of said all along about him. I think he did improve a lot as the season went along, and you saw a lot of his improvement with his offensive game, but also defensively. He had some lapses early in the year and struggled a lot with consistency early in the season with his defense, but he got a lot better as the season went along, obviously with a lot of his steals. but you can have a lot of steals and still be a mediocre overall defensive player. He did a better job of not letting other of the opposing guards blow by him as often as he kind of did earlier in the year. I think looking back at here at ESPN, I think that was in March. Never mind, that's an old one, but they had him kind of going in around the mid. A lot of the ones here that I'm looking at an article on Rocky Top Insider that was written by Rick Butler. A lot of the mock drafts recently here at the kind of end of March and the beginning of April have had Kennedy anywhere in kind of that number 15-ish spot to like 20. So kind of the 20 to 15 range is where a lot of people have had him. It looks like you have 18 to the Timberwolves, 19 with the Bulls there, Gene, your team, the Bulls picking him at 19. And then number 17 with the Pacers is kind of another one that's been thrown around there too.
Bring him. We'll take him. We need a point guard. Lonzo Ball's hurt. Can he suit up tomorrow? Because I don't think I got Lonzo Ball the rest of the season. I'll take him with my wings. I got good wings. Yeah, but yeah, it's so important for me. You really hope that this kid just gets himself to a good situation.
Yeah.
That kid hasn't lost a lot in life.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't, in high school, he didn't. When he went to prep school, he didn't. At Tennessee, he didn't. Like, they were good this year. Like, so the worst thing, like, you get some of these kids and they play for years, 4, 5, 6 years of high school ball, of AAU. And then they go to their rookie year and they're in a bad situation. And like take Jalen Suggs, for example. That kid's down in Orlando. And I imagine that this kid has not lost as much in his time in high school playing football and basketball to his 1 year at Gonzaga. You add all those years, all that stuff together, he did not lose as much as he did this year. And that's tough. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm saying, like, you kind of want to make sure the kid gets himself into a good situation. This isn't recruiting. You have no control over it. And so, like, it's why NFL draft, people are like, it's better to, not get drafted if you're not going to be early. Like, because you don't want to get, you want to have some say-so in your choice. Like, you want to have some say-so, but you don't. And it's a credit to how good of a player you are. Kennedy Chandler's a really good player. Again, I think the concerns about his height, whatever. But I thought consistently, I think against Michigan, he was as good of a player as there was on the court. I know everybody says he's the best player. It's fine if that's your metric. He was as dominating as anybody that was on the court that day. And like, that was kind of who he was, MVP of the SEC tournament. All that stuff does matter. He was good. He was really good. And I think he deserves a spot. But, like, just getting into college is only a small part of the battle. And it's like, you actually have to produce in college, whether it's academics, athletics, whatever. Professional ranks is the same thing. Like, just getting drafted, that's not the end game.
Right.
Like, that's not. And so, like, you gotta, so many people say it's not getting drafted, it's getting that second contract. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing. And so it'll be important for him once he learns where he's going to kind of figure out exactly what he has to do to get to that second contract. If he's got to do some G League time, if he's got to be like Jordan Bone was that year and just keep going up and down, up, back and forth, whatever it takes, man. Because, like, that's a kid who deserves to be able to showcase what he can do at that level. He does. I never thought Mac McClung would put on an NBA jersey, and he did. So, like, if he just, he's good enough to get an opportunity. We'll see where he ends up at, late first round, early second round, whatever, mid first round, all that stuff. And then we'll see her on the podcast. We'll break it down from that point forward. But I think the important thing is that, the kid has made a choice, has a chance to take advantage of it. And, so shout out to him for that.
Really quickly before we move on to Tennessee, like more specifically Tennessee moving forward talk. If he does get drafted in the top 20 in the first round, Gene, he'll be the first Vol in 11 years to get drafted with a top 20 pick. And that'd be, since Tobias Harris in 2011, who went 19 overall. And actually, he'd only be the fourth Vol in since Allen Houston in 1993 to be drafted in the top 20 picks in the NBA, because Houston went number 11 overall in 93. Hayslip went number 13 overall to the Bucks in 2002, and then of course Tobias went number 19 overall. So if he gets drafted top 20, he'll do something that only four Vols have done since I've been alive. So four Vols in the past 30 years have done, and that is get drafted in the top 20. Because technically, I mean, Keon was very close. He got drafted 21 overall, and then of course Jaden Springer was drafted 28. So they got close, and Grant was 22 back to the Celtics in 2019. So a couple of guys have gotten close to that top 20 mark, but Tennessee hasn't had a guy get drafted in the top 20 since Tobias Harris went 19 overall. And he's had a pretty good career, obviously very different type of player than Kennedy Chandler also. But Gene, let's look now at Tennessee moving forward here to the offseason. Just mentioned it a little while ago. Chandler gone, Tamba gone, Bailey gone, Vescovy not really gone. I think he'll come back next year. So right now you have three open spots on the roster. You are technically already have one of those filled because you have BJ Edwards signed in this class and he's coming in. So technically two open spots right now. John Fulkerson leaving doesn't open up, before anyone mentions it, him leaving doesn't open up a spot because he was using his COVID year. So that didn't, that was an extra scholarship Tennessee had for this past season. And once he's gone, it just is erased off there. Tennessee doesn't open up another spot for Tennessee to use this year because they were already technically over the limit of what a normal year would be. But all the COVID stuff gave teams additional roster spots for the time being, due to giving teams the extra year of eligibility for those seniors and stuff who wanted to use a super senior season due to COVID. So Fulkerson leaving doesn't open up a spot, but he is gone from this team's roster. Kennedy Chandler gone. So those are your two biggest losses. Kennedy Chandler, team's leading scorer, teams, the starting point guard, arguably your most talented prospect or most talented player on the roster, the MVP of the SEC tournament. He's gone. Fulkerson, your sixth-year player, a guy who set the record for most games played at Tennessee because he's around for forever. He is gone, and he to his credit, he played better down the stretch, but it just obviously was not the same Fulkerson we saw from a couple of years ago. Injuries and COVID and stuff affected him a lot. And it was very evident. He still had some very good moments during this past season, but I think losing him is a blow, but it's not one that Tennessee can't recover from for sure. And Tennessee has a lot of good returning players in the post moving ahead here. But you lose Victor Bailey Jr., who would have been a bigger loss last year, but again, didn't contribute a ton this year, and especially in games that mattered. And then Tamba didn't play because he redshirted. Again, there's a good chance there's a third guy leaving, but I don't expect it to be a guy who made significant contributions this year for Tennessee. Like I'm not expecting, a Josiah Jordan James to transfer or to go to the NBA. So I think he'll be back. Ziegler should be back. Camwa, I hope returns like fully healthy for next year. And then you have probably Brendan Huntley Hatfield as well, Urosh back for next season. And I believe Vescovy will be back as well. I think he'll end up coming back to Tennessee for his senior season. So, Gene, looking at the roster, how it is right now, looking at what you've lost, looking at kind of the makeup for next season, or at least kind of early on right here in the month of April, looking ahead to what you have here in the summer, potentially. It's already, we're already seeing Tennessee has reached out to a few different transfer options. One that's really been giving a lot of attention is a guy named Nigel Pack out of Kansas State, who is a 6'1", 180 guard, so about the same size as Kennedy Chandler, but he isn't really a point. He's kind of a point guard. He doesn't have, he wasn't used mainly as Kansas State's point guard this past year. He's more of a shooter, to be honest. He's a guy that can do some point stuff, but he isn't your starting point guard. Ideally, I would say. His first year at Kansas State, he averaged 12.7 points, 3.8 assists, 1.2 steals, 3.7 rebounds, and 2 turnovers per game as well. Shot 40.5% from three on 6 attempts from three per game. This past season for Kansas State, 17.4 points, 2.2 assists. So again, it shows to me like he wasn't the leading point guard for Kansas State. 1.5 turnovers per game, 1.3 steals, 3.8 assists, or 3.8 rebounds, excuse me. But Gene, he shot 7.5 3-pointers per game this year. He shot 218 threes total this season. It made 43.6% of them. that's absurd. That's an extremely high percentage. And he wasn't just shooting 1 or 2 per game. He shot 218 threes in 29 games for Kansas State. That's got to be one of the better percentages, one of the highest shooting percentages, especially for volume amount of threes attempted in the entire country. And he did it in a Big 12 that, Big 12 was pretty good this year. They were, I think, largely one of them and the SEC were considered two of the best regular season, conferences in the whole thing this year. And looking at his Big 12 numbers, he averaged 18.6 points. So he averaged even more points per game in Big 12 play than he did in other games this year, and shot 43.3% from three in Big 12 games. And he wasn't too bad from two. Like, looking overall in the season, he shot just under 48% from two. So 45.5% overall and 84.5% from the free throw line. Didn't get the free throw line a ton, but he normally sank them when he got there. That's an intriguing guy to me. There's been other guys reaching out to. The biggest recruiting guy Tennessee's looking at is Julian Phillips, who was at one time committed to LSU. Actually, I guess signed with LSU, got out of his NLI, and is now a hot commodity on the 2022 class. And Tennessee is really zeroed in on him. He is a guy who I think we talked about a little bit last week, Gene. He's a 5-star prospect. He's a guy who is listed as a power forward, but he's 6'8", 200. So he's more of a, to me, small forward type of guy, more of a almost kind of like a wing, I guess you could say. But he's a guy who's getting a ton of attention from a bunch of different schools. And Tennessee is also looking at Mark. What is his name? He's a guy who was once committed to Florida, who is a post player. Malik Renault, that's his name. He is another 5-star who played at Montverde Academy, which Tennessee's gotten some players from there. 6'8", 210. So again, I guess kind of around the same size actually as Phillips, but he's a one-time committed to Florida. He's also a 5-star in this class. Tennessee, I think, is interested in him, is looking at him, and is trying to get more traction there. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of traction. They've visited him and seen him and everything, but I don't know that Tennessee. I don't think they probably feel great about where they are right now, but I also don't know like what his timeline is exactly. But all that to get to this point, Gene, of you have 2 open spots right now, potentially a third one coming open, depending on if another guy transfers out. What do you think Tennessee's biggest position of need is? Because I think to me, it seems like they're looking at a lot of the names that it seems like Tennessee's been tied to in the transfer portal have been experienced guards / experienced point guards, or kind of like a combo guard type of situation, like a Nigel Pack, who is a pretty. I think it's pretty confident to say that's a pretty good combo guard type of guy who's really good sharpshooter from three, but also can dish out some assists if needed. But it seems to me like that's what Tennessee is really zeroing in on. But you and I were talking before we hit record here for the podcast of a big man who I think, of course, Tennessee looking at Malik Renault as well as a recruit, but a potential big man who's transferring, who I think Tennessee absolutely should be looking at, and I'd be a little surprised if they aren't. That is Jake Stevens, who played at VMI, who's 6'10", 266 this past year for VMI, which, they weren't a great team, but it doesn't matter. Looking at what he can do specifically, he averaged almost 20 points, 19.6 points per game, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, which is pretty good for a 3.3 assists, which is really good for a big man, and 2 blocks per game. And Gene, he attempted 5 threes per game, and he made 49% of those threes. He attempted 151 threes this past season and made 49% of them. That's an absurd amount. And looking at his previous numbers, they were nowhere close to that, but he still was over a 31%, 33% 3-point shooter in his previous 3 seasons at VMI. So as a big man in his career, he's attempted 499 threes. So basically 500 3-pointers in 4 years at VMI, and he made 37.9% of them. That's like the stretch 4, stretch 5 that Tennessee really could use, I think. I guess Olivier Camwa is kind of like that as well, not to that same degree, but I think, Gene, that it's pretty apparent Tennessee is really looking for an experienced guard so that it doesn't have to fall on a sophomore, Sakai Zeeler, and true freshman BJ Edwards next year, because I think BJ is very talented, but he's not. I don't think he has the acumen and the IQ that Kennedy Chandler does. And that's not a knock on BJ. I think it's more of a praise of Kennedy that just was such a high point of his game, was his high basketball IQ, along with his other physical talents and skills. So I think Tennessee makes sense that they're going after some experienced point guard / combo guards. But I also really do think they really do need to go find a post player, because I've seen a lot of people being more bullish on Tennessee's returning front court next year than I feel like. And maybe it's just maybe I'm being too, I guess, pessimistic. But I think if Campbell returns and is healthy, I love his potential. I want to see it. I kind of need to see it to believe it from Huntley Hatfield in terms of his development, to see if he can take that next step, because I like some things we saw from him this year, but he's really got to kick it into gear next year if Tennessee can have a viable front court of him, Kamwa, and then Urosh being your backup. And I think Adu has a high potential, but I don't expect Adu to be a guy next season that you're wanting to play 20 minutes a game. So I think Tennessee would do really well to go get experienced big man who can be, and I don't know, like an enforcer or a stretch. Like I kind of go back and forth on that, because I could see the merit in either one of those options. But Gene, I think to me it makes sense to go get an experienced point guard, but I really think you got to go get a big at some point. Like it doesn't have to be, a Walker Kessler type or anything like that, a guy who's going to be coming and be an instant impact, starter and defensive player of the year. But I think you got to get some sort of big man in this transfer portal. I don't know, again, what role that exactly to fill, but some role, some way, somehow. I think a guy who's 6'9" or taller, Tennessee needs to go try to find that in the transfer portal, along with an experienced veteran guard presence as well.
Sure. And I do think, let me start here. I understand the infatuation with Julian Phillips. Mm-hmm. I surely do. But I'll say this. I was thinking about this last week. And I'm probably not the only one to think about this. Julian Phillips was a 5-star. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
With plenty of options. And he chose LSU. Why did LSU's coach lose his job? So, like, it would just be interesting to me to see. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe he took his official visit down there and he loved walking along the cage where the tiger is. I don't know. Maybe that's reckless speculation. I don't know. But let's just say I feel like somebody's going to pay that tab. And like, it feels like you've got to get into some muddy waters potentially for a guy like that Tennessee may not be willing to go down. I mean, look, is that fair? Probably not. Especially as a lot of this stuff is above water now because of NIL. But it just feels as though, look, man, I'd openly say that when I worked with LSU's former head coach, he was a friend that I talked to. We obviously don't need more. But in that time, we built a friendship and it was cool. But I also am keenly aware of what transpired, what was on the audio tape. And so it just stands to reason that may not have been the easiest recruitment. So I don't know. Is that the road you want to go down? I don't know. I think there's a reason why Tennessee's going after what seem should be going after more experienced bigs. I think I haven't seen as much on the twitter.com as to Tennessee's recruiting stuff, just consumed with a lot of different things right now. But
yeah. You get a full player now.
I mean, I do think that, the Phillips one is an interesting one. You keep saying that there could be a third, and I don't want to speculate, but I've got a name in my mind. And I don't want to say there's necessarily a log jam inside, but it feels like there's a piece in that rotation. Like, I don't count Tamba. No disrespect to the kid. Wish him the best. I mean, if he ends up in Chattanooga, I'll cover him. I'll tell a story. But I always felt like that was one of those Drew Pember type signings. And if you know what I'm meaning, you know what I mean. And Um, but there was already a log jam there, and there's only so many minutes, and there's four bigs that had at least one moment this season for Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
At least one, in some cases more. And it feels like if there's going to be some attrition, it seems, I mean, in terms of the people, because when I hear potentially a third player, I'm not thinking the perimeter. I'm not thinking about those guys like, the Quentin kid. I'm not thinking names like that. I'm thinking people who are, I don't think it would be like, to me, it doesn't feel like a kid like Powell. Because that kid transferred to Tennessee knowing how Rick Barnes was. But he also sat there and watched how, he may have been hard on me, but man, he's really hard on Kennedy. Man, he's hard on Kennedy. And it seemed to work out in the end. I mean, so it just feels like if there's a log jam on the interior because you got a bunch of young kids that want to play, but you've also got Urosh and you've also got Olivier. So like you've got the two that kind of had their moments of freshmen, but you've got the two kids that are going to be seniors next year as well. Maybe I'm wrong. There feels like that is as likely of a place where you're going to see some attrition. And so if you're going to lose those two and look for everything all the things that we can say about Kamwa and Urosh, they've both struggled.
Mm-hmm.
They both had struggles. Last year was a good year for each one of them. Olivier didn't really play well against quality competition for a good portion of the year. Before he got hurt, he was. There were a couple games I felt like he was their best player. Urosh is going to Urosh. And I don't mean that bad because that dude grew on a lot of people this year.
Yeah.
I think people just had to realize what he was. I think that was the thing with him. It was never that he wasn't. It's just I feel like he came to Tennessee with perhaps unfair expectations with the free Urosh, and there was just this yearning to maintain what had happened the year before when Urosh got there. We got to maintain that, man. This guy's going to get us back in the tournament. He's better than Kyle Alexander at this point. We got to do it. We got to do it. We got to do it. And now I think the expectations have just kind of been managed as to what he is. He's a good player. He's probably going to lead the country in getting other people technical fouls, but while never getting one, which is an amazing skill, by the way. Amazing skill. He may get one, whatever. He's an amazing teammate. He's a really good basketball player. But I think people just realize what he is. But I feel like you kind of need to get somebody else there. For me, like you mentioned, the Stevens kid from VMI. See, the kid that's been developed. He's always been a pretty decent player. Really exploded the last 2 years. And we were averaging basically 20 and 9, shooting 48% from three-point range.
Mm-hmm.
And that range, and he took 153s.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a special skill. I mean, that has sort of one, like the one hit wonder appeal that a guy like Brady Manick had. And we saw what just happened with him. And like that's the type of guy, he kind of changes what you do on offense because he can shoot that, but he can also post up and he can send some of those other kids out. So for me, that would be a type of kid that I would maybe take a shot on. As far as guards, I mean, you mentioned the kid from Kansas State. Seems like a good fit. I don't know. Again, I don't know enough about the rest of who Tennessee is going after, but like if you can get some combination of a big who can consistently hit shots on the perimeter, shoot 38 to 42%, somewhere in that range, get a guard that can hit shots, and then you return all the other pieces that you expect to get back. It's like you, unless the kid goes overseas, I imagine Vescovi's coming back. And then you do that with the other you get the other guys, Josiah. I'm there. Meshack, Ziegler. You get those other guys, and all of a sudden you're right back in the top. You're a top 20. I've seen some preseason stuff that has them like 50, in the 15 to 20 range. You get a couple pieces and filter in the gaps, and you're just as good next season. Your point guard's not as explosive. It is what it is. BJ Edwards is really good. Really good. And I think that's pretty much the only difference from last year to this year. So we'll see what happens with the roster. We're in what? I mean, we're barely in April. So we don't know what this roster is going to look like.
Yeah, right. Now we still, again, as you mentioned, like a guy could transfer it. And I think it's interesting you said that you don't think it'll be wing, because I think I think, like you said, there's a couple of different guys like kind of circle and say, I think this could be who it is. So it just won't surprise me unless it's a Josiah or something like that transfers. No one else is going to surprise me in terms of transferring off the roster. I don't think he would obviously. Josiah's a Tennessee guy. He's a Rick Barnes guy through and through. He's like an Admiral Schofield in terms of. Maybe it's a bad example. I'd say Grant, but he's not a 3-year player. So Josiah's his own guy. He's a Tennessee Rick Barnes guy. That, I mean, we saw the interview after Tennessee won the SEC tournament title, like the interview that Josiah gave, and how just emotional he was, and the things he talked about Rick Barnes, saying that he wouldn't be here without him. So I think he's not going anywhere. So I'm going to stop talking about him. But literally, Gene, as we're talking here, like 10 minutes ago, as if we're recording this here on Wednesday night, John Rothstein just tweeted out that LSU transfer Brandon Murray tells me that he will visit Tennessee, Illinois, and Georgetown. An official decision from him is expected on Monday. So Monday, April 11th is when Brandon Murray is supposed to be making his official decision. And he's going to be visiting Tennessee, Illinois, and Georgetown. One of those is not like the other. Granted, Georgetown has a really good history, but they've been awful lately. But Tennessee and Illinois obviously have not been. I think we've talked about Murray on the podcast before, Gene, but he's a guy who's about a 6'5" guard who, not a terrible shooter. He was a 33% shooter from 3 this past season for LSU, but he's also actually in the SEC play. He's even better. He shot about 35% from 3, but he's a guy who is a pretty good defender. And he also averaged for the season 10 points, 3 boards, basically 2 assists, and a steal per game on the year. Shot 49% from 2, 67% from free throw line. So not great there, but he's known as being a very solid defender. If I remember right, I'm gonna look up his game log, because I feel like he torched Tennessee in one of the games when they played LSU. I could be wrong, but I feel like he did. But he's a guy who is considered one of the top transfer options currently in the portal right now. He played. So when he played Tennessee at LSU, he scored 13, which isn't bad, but then he dropped 15. So he didn't torch Tennessee, but he had some good games against Tennessee. Scored 13 in the win against Tennessee, then scored 15 in the loss in Knoxville against Tennessee. Shot pretty well from both those games. 4 of 8 in the home game and 7 of 12 in the road game against Tennessee. So he's not a bad option. He's a guy who, again, he picked it up kind of as the year went along. LSU obviously dropped off a lot as a team as the year went along, but he would be an interesting prospect, or interesting, I guess, addition, whatever, how you want to word it, for me, Gene, because he's a guy that he fits into that backcourt. I guess he's kind of a combo guard. Like I wouldn't want him to be you're probably a ball handler by any means, but he's a guy that can take some pressure off of Vescovy, pressure off of some of the younger guards that are the point guards with BJ Edwards and Ziegler there. But I think Brandon Murray is just a guy that I think he plays defense how Rick Barnes likes defense being played. He was an SEC all freshman this past year. He's an interesting one. I don't know. To me, this is not based off any inside information, not based off of anything I've seen like online and message boards or anything like that. But it just seems to me almost like if I were him, Illinois maybe makes more sense than Tennessee, just because I look at Tennessee's backcourt and I think, where exactly do I fit in? Because Vescovy is going to start. Josiah is going to start at that 3, maybe at the 4. you're going to have BJ Edwards, or I mean, probably Ziegler starting at point. I guess maybe if you start small ball, like so if you go with Camel at the 5 and then you go Josiah at the 4, then I guess that 3 spots open, and that's where you could slot in Phillips there. And maybe he feels like, or Murray, excuse me. So that's where he feels like he could start there, and you have Huntley Hatfield and Urosh coming off the bench, and then I guess also at that point Jonas Adu as a bench player too at the post. But like I feel like if I'm him, maybe I don't know Illinois' roster situation because I don't, I'm not a fan of Illinois, so I don't watch them as much and don't know their roster as much. But if they have an easier path to playing time, if I'm Brandon Murray, I don't know that I would go from a place like LSU where I was averaging what was his minutes per game, because he played in all 30. He played 33 games. He's averaging 31 minutes a game. I don't know if I'm going to go somewhere where I was playing 31 minutes a game and was getting a good amount of touches on offense and playing well on defense, to a place where I'll be maybe making maybe playing 20-ish minutes a game, and maybe sometimes not even doing that. So that's an interesting one to me, is Brandon Murray. I think it's good Tennessee is interested there, and good that they're getting the visit from him, but I think he would be a benefit to the team. I just don't know exactly where he would fit it unless Tennessee is committed to going more of that small ball lineup more consistently next season, like they did a lot this past season.
Yeah. To my previous statement, if you're going after a guy like Murray, it would almost suggest that one of the pieces that you made, this third potential piece, may be a guard.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting you mentioned the Illinois, because I'm sitting here looking at the roster because I just saw Illinois play like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, you did.
And as we see here, I still have this Illinois paperwork. The 3 starting guards: Trent Frazier, senior, Alfonso Plumbers, graduate, Andre Curbelo, transfer portal. He was a sophomore. And just for good measure, just to remind people, Omar Payne.
Yeah.
Just want to throw that name out there since I forgot it last week. But yeah, so there's obviously a situation there. If that's what he chooses to go, the route he chooses to go. Yeah, like I don't know enough. I know the sorts of guards that we'll typically win after, and so just based off of what that is, what that looks like, that's a different sort of guard than what they typically have. I mean, but you're talking about a kid who's big bodied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he's 6'5", 215 pounds. Strong. Had a good season.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm trying to see how well he shot it. I mean, not a good shooter.
It wasn't. Yeah, he's not. He's more of a.
Yeah.
He's more of a. I feel like a defensive minded guy, like first, but he's not an awful shooter either by any stretch of the means either.
Yeah, like LSU under Will Wade was not going to. They were going to have a team full of dudes who may not shoot it great, but sometimes could get streaky. But that's just tough, hard-nosed guys. Which is, I'm sitting here looking. I mean, Murray has some good games. He's a good player. He'd be a good fit. I think my only question is, at this point in your career, are you willing to be a role player?
Right. Yeah.
At this point, like it's not like he's coming from UTC. Like, you're coming from Power 5 basketball, literally the same league, same conference.
Yeah. Team you played against twice.
Yeah. So how well would you adapt going in? Because, based off what we know today on April 6th, we believe, what we know is that BJ Edwards is coming in. That's the kind of Ziegler is going to have a role. That Josiah Jordan James is still on the roster. I mean, now we believe Vescovy will be on the roster. Those are the things that we know, and plus one thing we believe. So if you're going to give me those 4 names, I'm not sure you take that spot.
Yeah.
From those guys. Like, the kid will probably end up at Georgetown or something, but There is certainly space at Illinois, and there's certainly space at Georgetown. But I think the biggest thing for me is there's a reason that Tennessee has reached out to him and he's visiting. That's not by accident. Like he's not. We're past the days of fake recruitment, and he's out here, propping up visits that actually aren't happening. So there's some reason for the interest from Tennessee, and maybe like, is the kid a COVID sophomore or is he truly a sophomore? I'm sorry, he'll be okay. So
he was
he's
a
not
freshman
COVID,
this past
he'll
year.
be a sophomore. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, like maybe there's a Josiah Jordan James sort of factor there. He's a little bit shorter. Maybe he could be the next that. I don't know, but yeah, I'll be intrigued to see where that recruitment goes, because obviously this time next week, the next time we sit down and talk about this stuff, a decision should have been made, unless for some reason we're doing this thing on Sunday because it's some emergency pod situation. A decision will have been made as far as Murray's concerned, and
right.
I'm just trying to figure out where he's talking about making a decision Monday. Is he visiting any of these schools?
Yeah, he's visiting. So apparently he's visiting all three. And I'm guessing from that timeline, he's going to start visiting like tomorrow, like on Thursday. I guess, well, most people listening to this, it'll be today, or what I'm saying Thursday, but like visiting Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I guess is when he's going to go visit those, which, I mean, I guess, so he's from Baltimore. So I guess maybe he starts up there at Georgetown and then goes down to Illinois and then goes down to Tennessee. Like that, I guess if he's back home, like if he's not still down in Louisiana, because he's probably, I guess, still in school. So maybe he starts at Tennessee and then moves up. I don't know. That he's got to visit him soon if he's making a decision Monday and he says he's going to visit.
Maybe he goes Tennessee, Illinois, Georgetown.
Yeah.
And then maybe spends the day with his family and makes the decision. Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a lot of work to put into 5 days, but
yeah,
like you're talking to a person that took 2 weeks to recover from driving to and from Pittsburgh. So I don't know. Maybe it does not sound like a good idea to me. But like I don't know how he's going to get there. It's all probably flights and stuff. But it doesn't sound like fun travel. I don't care if it's flight or car right now.
No,
that's too much work in 4 days.
Yeah, I'm wondering why I'm wondering if the Monday is like just a choice, like a self-imposed deadline, because that seems like you said, just seems like an awful lot of rushing around. Like if I'm like, I don't know, maybe he has a reason, maybe he feels like he has to jump in the boat sooner rather than later for schools, but I don't know. That's interesting to me that he's making that decision that quickly, because also like with Tennessee, I feel like, can I go back to the LSU connection with the Julian Phillips thing? You're looking at him like, I don't know, the spots Tennessee has open right now. Again, they currently only have 2 open, but if you are getting another transfer, that'll be 3. Like you're in a spot where you're not. Well, it's not like last year where you had a lot of spots open. You have some this year. You do have more transfers out this year, or a couple of transfers out, and a guy going to the NBA. But last year, Tennessee had, like wholesale roster change from last season. We talked about that a lot around this time last year and into May and June of last season. But Tennessee had, I'll go back and count it, but they had obviously Keon and Jaden go into the NBA, but you had Devontae Gaines, you had Drew Pember, you had Corey Walker Jr., and you also had Eve Pons went into the NBA as well. So three NBA draft picks. Well, one of those was a graduating senior. EJ Nasicki, Devontae Gaines, Drew Pember, and Corey Walker all transferred off the roster last year as well. So, I mean, you had that is mentioned 7 guys. Yeah, 7 guys from that team all leave, and you had a bunch of open spots. You had 7 open spots to fill from last season. This year it's a lot different. Like you can afford to be picky. Last year you had enough spots where you didn't have to be like super picky. You say, okay, we can add this guy, we can add this guy, we can stash this guy away, with like a Tamba for redshirting. Adu, we can pick him up late into the thing. We can get guys to reclassify like Ziegler. Ziegler was the last edition, and obviously ended up having a huge impact. But he's a guy who you could you could afford to take a flyer on, because at that point you still had an open roster spot, and you'd say, hey, let's take a flyer on this kid who we've seen play, love what we saw the court from him. Let's take a flyer on him because we still have an open roster spot. that's not maybe the case this year. Like Tennessee can afford to be pickier. You have 2 spots open right now, and I think you'd like to sign one more high school kid, so you don't just have just BJ Edwards coming in as a freshman. You'd like to have a second freshman coming in. So that leaves 1 spot and then maybe 2 for a transfer. Do you want to? Is Brandon Murray for sure the guy you want? And then if you have another one open up, then yeah, you have a little more leeway. But if Tennessee is dead set on getting more of a combo guard, I don't know that Murray fits that mold. And again, we're speculating just as a fan and as Gene as someone who covers basketball at large and in college athletics. But the coaches have a plan. Like I'm not privy to what Barnes, Rod Clark, Justin Gainey, and Greg Polinsky's plan is, and what their big board in terms of what they're looking at roster wise and everything. They have a plan more than we do, that's for sure, for this type of stuff. But I'm just interested that is Brandon Murray like high enough on that list for Tennessee for them to say we are for sure taking you no matter what else happens on our roster, or is it a case of, okay, Gene, maybe we'll see some more roster movement here in the next couple of days, and maybe that'll kind of clear things up, and we'll go, okay, well then that makes sense then. Now that this guy's transferred, that opens up that additional spot for Murray, so Tennessee still has 2 open spots available to pursue a freshman and then another potential transfer guy. So again, we're recording this on a Wednesday night. By the time we're done recording, Gene, we could, within 24 hours of this podcast going live, there could be another guy transferring off the roster. I mean, that's the transfer portal is crazy. We think it's crazy right now with the men's game. Like the women's game, you and I haven't talked about Lady Vols today. I'm hopeful to have a Lady Vols podcast recorded either Thursday or Friday of this week. But man, women's game has been, I feel like, even more insane for the transfer portal than the men's this year. I mean, Maryland's losing about almost their entire roster to the transfer portal on the women's side of things. So and of course, Lady Vols have already added 2 transfers as well with Jazz Powell and Rakia Jackson. So again, things are in flux. We're in very early April. The season literally just ended this week. Monday was the championship game. So who knows what's going to happen? This time last year, Tennessee had gotten. I've never looking up as I saw some posts from this time last year on like your memories on Facebook, or my memories on Facebook, on the page for Vol Basketball Fever, Gene, and was talking about Tennessee landing. I think Justin Powell was a transfer. So, or maybe it was. It's either Justin Powell or it was Adu, or it was it was either like a big time, like maybe Quentin DeBonge. It was either a recruit like commit or Justin Powell transfer. But Tennessee still had, I think at that point, yeah, it was a commit because they had 5 guys committed to them in the class, counting I think Powell or whatever. So I was like, well, that's 5 guys. They ended up adding another couple on there. So like we this time last year, Tennessee had most of the class kind of figured out, but they still had open spots available, and didn't have the full roster figured out this time last year. And of course, last year the timeline was different because of COVID too. So who knows, Gene? Like I said, by the time you now record next week, Brandon Murray will have made his decision, whether it's Tennessee, Illinois, or Georgetown. Maybe another guy transfers off the roster. Maybe Tennessee gets a commitment from another guy. Maybe Tennessee picks up another transfer. Who knows what's going to happen between now and next Tuesday, Wednesday, when we record next week.
Welcome to college basketball in 2022, where like the roster that you see in the 48 hours after the season ends may not be the roster a month from now. And it's such a fluid situation that week to week you could be talking about a player that you had not even thought about the week before. Mm-hmm. In some cases, these things happen so quickly, where a kid will get rumored to a school and then all of a sudden he's visiting and then he's committing, and it's like, where does this kid come from? But then you're looking and maybe he's a high school kid, because obviously I'm keenly aware that live recruiting starts this weekend. Like the first NCAA live period is this weekend. Do Tennessee coaches go out to one of these tournaments? There's a couple in Atlanta. I think they're all in Atlanta this weekend, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but you're in Atlanta. Like, are all the coaches there? Are they evaluating certain kids? Are they trying to bring in a high school kid, a kid that maybe you hadn't thought about, who blows up one weekend and has all the metrics that a coach wants? Maybe a kid who was injured during the year, just got healthy. Like, you just never know. And so this time next week, it could be a completely different recruiting board. The week after that, completely different. Maybe a kid, maybe Brandon Murray chooses another school. And guess what? There's going to be another Brandon Murray. because that's college basketball in 2022. It'll eventually work itself out, because the COVID year stuff throws a lot of stuff off too. And we're in year one of that technically.
Yeah, I think so. You're one of that technically.
And so you've got all these kids who are, freshmen. Like UTC's got a kid who's going to be a fourth-year freshman because he redshirted. He played in 1920, which is the COVID season. And then this year he had blood clots in his leg. Oh. And so next year he's planning on being back, and he'll be a fourth-year freshman. But the COVID stuff throws so much off. And, you say it and it sounds funny. And, he and I laughed about it a few weeks back, but it's the truth. Like, these numbers, and not everybody has to use that year. Let's be clear. Kids can just, leave and start school. But like John Fulkerson took his year. And so everybody's like, how was it? Because he took the COVID year. And so it throws all these metrics off. What is really, really Josiah, Kamwa, that class, those guys are sophomores, right? They're about to be juniors.
Well, no, Josiah's going to be a senior. Yeah, this will be his fourth year, and this will be, Kamwa's fourth year too.
But I'm saying, but with the COVID year,
oh right, you're saying
that's what I mean. Yeah,
I think technically they'd be fourth year juniors, maybe.
Yeah, they'll be COVID juniors next year. Yeah. That's what I was getting at. Like, technically, this is he just played his COVID sophomore year. And look, at this level, these kids are less likely to use all. I mean, he may graduate and decide to go somewhere else or something, but why would you leave Tennessee right now? And or like in the next 2 years, like, why would you leave? So like, it just, the metrics are just completely out of whack. They've changed so much. It's crazy. But, like as the coach, said today, I may not love the current state of where we're going, but you better adjust. He said, you better adjust or you're going to get left behind. And so like, we all have to like wrap our mind around the portal and just how fluid these situations are going to be, and try to understand what these situations are, because they're always going to be changing. Always going to be changing.
Well, Gene, I'm sure as the listeners have heard, there's a storm coming here in Knoxville tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast because the thunder is starting to get a little louder here. And plus we've talked, and I was going to end the podcast around this point anyway. So again, appreciate all of you for tuning in. If you guys have questions, I think maybe next time we do an episode, we'll obviously have, I'm sure, news to cover, whether it's Brandon Murray or not. But I think we're due for a mailbag episode here soon. So I may stick around, look on Twitter at Vol Hoops Fever on Twitter, and we may be asking for some questions from our listeners here soon to do a mailbag episode, because I think be nice to, because I'm sure it'd be a mix of talking about the season, talking about looking ahead and things like that. So be on the lookout. If it's not this next week, it'll be probably the week after next. We'll be asking some questions from you guys for an episode here soon, for a mailbag episode of Vol Basketball Fever. But again, thank you all for tuning in. As I mentioned, top of the show, subscribe if you haven't. Leave us a nice 5-star review. We'd appreciate that a ton. And just again, thank you for all the support. We really appreciate it. Been doing this for a Vol specific one for over a year now. So it's been a lot of fun and pretty rewarding. Appreciated all the feedback and all the comments and everything you guys leave on social media and on the YouTube and stuff. We started back in December, or I guess November as well. But signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael. This has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.